We've got John Smith co-hosting as usual. Hi, John.
I'm here for the color and commentary.
There you go, right? and we have Tom back with us, Tom Valconet. He is a attorney and realtor extraordinaire, we'll say.
Yes.
And then
Extraordinaire.
we have extraordinaire. We have Deb McPherson, Deb, the real deal McPherson, tuning in from Keller Williams today. Welcome, Deb.
Yes. Hello.
So give us some insight into you, Deb. It's your first time on here, so tell us a little bit about you and your real estate background.
Sure. So I've been a realtor for going on 15 years. I love it. I pretty much love all aspects, even the troubleshooting part of it, I think is absolutely wonderful. I've actually worked with John Smith before. He and I've been at the same brokerage before. Yep. Only good things to say about my buddy. Only good things. I've known you, Susan, since high school. So it's funny how all this comes full circle.
Full circle, right?
Yeah. Tom, it's good to meet you. But yeah, definitely. I mean, we're definitely in a different market right now. It definitely ebbs and flows. It's funny how sometimes business just is overwhelmingly busy, and then other times it's like more education and really having to explain to people what's going on with interest rates and the inventory and why we can't find the perfect home right now.
It's interesting you say that, Deb, because that kind of opens up a little bit of a window for us to talk about a funnel process, and if you're in outside sales, everybody knows that you have a funnel, and that funnel gets really full at the top. And that's when we get super busy and we've got 4 or 5, 6 transactions going at one time. Sometimes, I think I had 14 going at one time back, years and years ago. And yeah. It's a hard struggle, right? It's a juggle. You're throwing everything up in the air and seeing where it falls. And then we go through that period where we're so busy with those people that the funnel kind of dries out. And then you see that we're not able to rebuild that funnel right away. So, this podcast focuses not just on buyers and sellers, but also on the legal stuff, which we have Tom, thank God, joining us today and many times. So thank you, Tom. We also have our peers, our other realtors that can help us discover the easiest way to do things. And that's kind of what the podcast does. It allows us to work together. Now, John, what's your story of the week?
Just an unbelievable water bill and tax escrow nightmare.
Yeah, you were saying earlier, John had somebody that's water bill doubled or tripled.
Please continue.
Oh my goodness!
Right?
I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you a quick story. We list a property on Druid Hill in the 3900 block. So we go to the property. Guy wants to list. I asked to see the basement. He's like, "Why do you need to see the basement?" I was like, "Sir, I'm listing your house. That's the basement." So he goes, "Well, did Gary tell you about the basement?" I said, "Yeah, you got a little bit of water issue. Can I just look at it?
Famous last.
Maybe I'll be able to help you, right?" So I go and look at it, and I said, "This is highly unusual. Your water line comes in the back off of the alley. So it's not your water line. It's got to be something in the street." So he says, I said, "Call the city and have them come out. We can come back next Tuesday." He says, "Okay, I'll do that. I'll come back down from Jersey," because he lived in Jersey. And so we're in the house, we're talking. I said, "Have you heard from the water people?" He said, "No, but they said they're definitely coming." I go outside to get something out of my car, and the Baltimore City water vehicle is parked on the sidewalk and part in the street. And I said, "He's here, great." So I'm looking around for him. I go around back because I know that the water line comes in the back. And he's in the back checking. And I said, "It's not in the back. It's on the front wall." And so we make our way back to the front of the house, and we're standing in the house. We're standing right on the curb right next to his vehicle. The other agent comes out of the house. We're standing there, and I was like, "Shh." I said, "Do you hear that water?" "I hear water running like rapids." And he says, "Oh." And I said, I stand over, there's a sewer lid right like 3 feet off the sidewalk. And I go over to the sewer lid and I said, "It's right here." So he pops the top. You would have thought it was Niagara Falls running through there.
Yeah.
Wow.
something broke.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He's
something
like,
broke
he's
somewhere.
like, I
Yeah,
don't know where that
that's
water's coming.
crazy. Wow.
Yeah.
So I think that the point John's making is that you really got to watch your water bill. You got to watch and make sure that these things aren't. There's nothing
Watch
wrong
your
with it.
escrow
You got
analysis,
to
your
watch
water
and make
bill,
sure. Yeah,
everything.
because if there's a leak and it's city, the city's going to stand by it and they're going to correct it. Might take a year. I guess that's the point of that too. Might take a long time, but you should be able to get that fixed. I was talking to somebody and the question came up. It was a realtor that asked this question about when do you pull the trigger? When do we pull the trigger when a buyer sees 100 houses? When do you say, you know what, you're really not buying right now? Or, what are your thoughts, guys? I personally think once you invest so much time, it's hard to walk away. Those buyers don't realize that you're taking up hours and hours and hours and miles of gas. And when do you pull
But
the
you don't
trigger?
yeah, you don't want to fall into what they call the gambler's fallacy, right? Just one more hand
Mhm.
of blackjack, I'll get it
One
all.
more.
Yeah.
And you invest all that time in someone who's just perpetually kicking tires.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Uh, you've got your own financial needs to pay your rent and your employees, and you have
Hmm.
to pull the plug and have a candid discussion that says you're not ready to buy because you're not
Yeah.
making a decision.
Hmm.
And we see that in the law firm context, where we give advice, and the client doesn't follow it. And my partner, Mr. Young, long retired, taught me in the '80s, a client has a God-given right to ignore my good advice.
Yeah.
That's true.
And
And
so,
they
and
do.
so you
Right, sometimes.
right, and so you can't
Mm-mm.
force them, you can't ignore them. You just have to know when to send them on their way and welcome them back when they're ready.
Yeah, something that
Hmm.
I do, and I've run into this before as well, is you kind of make it a positive and you say, look, I know that you feel bad having me come out and show you these properties. So why don't you start driving by them and check out the neighborhood and make sure that you're ready to look at this particular house? We're not in a market where buyers can really sit back and wait. So, if they're going to run and they're going to look at every single house that comes up in that zip code or in that area, you got to kind of play it by ear and go, if it's not really a house that you think is going to work for them, because we all know after 10 houses, we kind of know what they want, right? I mean, at that point, we've
Yeah.
really established what their criteria is, what they're looking for. So we can either I do one of two things. I either say, do you have an iPhone? Can I FaceTime you? Because that way, you put that realtor, you put that power back in your lap where you can say, all right, they want me to preview A, B, and C. I'm going to do it during the time that I'm showing this agent. You know what I mean? Like you can fit it in your schedule,
Hmm.
not their schedule. And then also the drive-bys, just ask them to drive by. 90% of the time, the drive-by is going to eliminate the house. If
Yes,
you know what I mean, it really
it
will.
does.
So 90% of the time, you can save your
Yeah,
time, still
Hmm.
respecting your client and still, making sure that you take advantage of your schedule versus their schedule. Um,
sure.
I know
You know,
I've
so
sat down with them and gone over everything, and I'll bring in the homes in question, saying, "Well, you said a basement is a must, so we just aren't going to look at the ones with no basements anymore." So things that,
exactly.
yeah, so non-negotiables then become musts. Like we're not going to negotiate because we're spinning our wheels. And it's just like every time they have to get out of their house, if people still living there, and then you go and you get
Absolutely.
excited and then you get let down again, the client. So I think it's just imperative that if it gets to where we're spinning our wheels, that
Yep.
I'll regroup and just go over
Yeah,
the must-haves
absolutely.
and stick to them. Yeah, no matter what. But the drive-by thing, cherry, 100%.
Yeah,
Totally
it really
agree.
does.
Yeah.
It saves you a lot of time. That would be my suggestion to the realtor listening. Um, I really think you just need to kind of take the bull by the horns and say, we've looked at a lot of properties. I don't want you to burn out. So there's tools that we use And one of those tools is always making it, I don't want the negative for you, client, right? So I don't want you to burn out. So
Mm-hmm.
drive by at your convenience. Anytime today. I'll set it for tomorrow at 6 p.m. If after you drive by, you really like it, we'll go see it. If you don't really like it, because then you're kind of, you're giving them your time, even though you're really not. You're giving them the opportunity to tell you, yes, this is one I really want to see. And then, like Deb said, you gotta kind of, if they're going to drive by and then still go see it, even though they don't like it, then you got to revisit the criteria again as well and kind of narrow it down. We had another question come in that was a realtor talking about pricing expectations and how they don't really know, or they're not comfortable when they sit down with a seller, that doesn't understand that they're priced too high. So what are your thoughts on that, Tom?
From the seller or the buyer's perspective, because
From the seller's or the agent's perspective. I mean, I have a couple things, but I want to hear your guys' opinions too.
Sure. Well, the majority of our work, our real estate brokerage works hand in glove with the law firm.
Yeah.
And we're mostly on the seller's side because they're transactions, forced transactions that fall out of failed relationships that we litigate in the law firm. And
Absolutely.
so I spend a lot of time preparing properties for sale. So for instance, this past 2 weeks alone, I have 2 settlements finally in partition sales where we had to file lawsuits under the new Partition Act to force one of the owners to come forward and agree to hire a broker and sell. We had to get a court order, and now we're going to sell. The issue of price was hotly contested. One seller thought it would be worth much more because he had invested so much time in materials that were not yet incorporated in the building.
Right.
And he thought he could get all that value back. It took the judge hiring an independent broker to come to court to say, this is the value of the brick as it exists for us.
Yeah.
And that's the only way we could get to a listing price. And then once the court decided the value, then it was listed and it was sold in the ordinary course. But it took me about 6 months to get to price through the new statute. So that's one example of how we go and deal with a recalcitrant owner, someone who's not eager to agree to a price. And another case that I resolved over the last 2 weeks, which I'm very proud of, that's why I want to tell you about it. But a homeowner wanted to sell, and I found that the driveway next to the house, which was also a common driveway for about 15 lots behind the house,
Okay.
they didn't have a right to use it. No easement, and it wasn't in their deed. But I found it used to be in their deed in 1936, but the developer purchased it from them with no retained right of access. So they had no driveway going to their garage. They were cut off.
Oh, wow.
And none of the neighbors wanted to include them in the easement. They all said no.
Oh, gosh.
And I said to the client, you're not going to get $300,000 for your house if you don't have a driveway to your garage.
Nope.
So it took us about a year. But what we did is we did the research and found that the developer had died in 1951, and the driveway was never processed through his estate and was still in the dead person's name.
Oh my gosh.
So the law firm went to Baltimore County and reopened the 1951 estate, found a relative with the same last name, got them appointed as PR, and we bought the road from him.
Wow.
So now we own the entire right of way.
There you go, Tom.
Yeah.
There you go.
And now, and our listing is now coming soon because we're waiting for some photographs, but it's going to be an ordinary transaction, and we can set the price because now it's a fully formed lot with a driveway.
Yeah.
But that took over a year to prepare. And all along the way, I had to counsel the client on their expectations.
Yeah.
Because they said, I want to sell now. I said, you can sell now, but it's a fire sale.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you want an arm's length transaction for full fair market value, you need a GD driveway,
Right.
Right.
right?
Exactly. You're not getting in
So
there without it. Right.
yeah. And so I'll give you the last example of what we've done over the last 2 weeks. Another forced sale. When I say forced sale, it's the sale between investors. There's no homeowner involved.
Right. Okay.
And there was an old lien, which we think was a fraudulent lien arising from a lot of investor flipping fraud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it took us 4 months to get the title insurance company to recognize it was a fraudulent lien
Oh,
and that nobody was going to come to enforce it.
Right.
And then to convince the title insurance company, don't hire someone like me to go to court to avoid the lien. Just insure over it because it's a useless piece of paper. It will never be enforced. And that took a lot
Wow.
of cajoling and persuading. But once the title insurance company said, we will insure over that bogus lien, boom, we have a
Wow.
property that we can sell and we can set the price.
yeah, good. That's
And
good.
so these are examples of where we have to work with unwilling sellers or
Mhm.
properties that aren't cooperating, uncooperative properties.
A
And we have
divorce,
to.
right? I mean, how many
Oh yeah,
divorce deals? We get sucked into divorce situations as well, but as an attorney, I'm sure you see a whole different side of it than we do.
Mhm.
Like I have to just put Bob in one room and Betty in the other.
yeah.
It's like, all right, Bob,
You
you're
know,
sitting over here, Betty, you're over there.
yeah.
I mean,
The most
it's a
difficult,
mess.
yeah, the most difficult one is when you have unmarried couples who fall out of like.
Oh gosh, right? We've
Right.
had a
Then they're
whole
just,
podcast on that. On a whole
yeah. So
podcast on buying a house without being married and
yeah.
what
Okay.
can happen. It's something else. So to
I think I told this story.
uh-oh.
But I'm gonna tell it again because I think it was on the last time we did this. They got corrupted. We couldn't run it.
Right.
Um, Knew a girl who was a hairdresser, right?
Uh-huh. Yep.
Bought a house with her boyfriend, right? And as the experienced person I am, I felt I needed to have the conversation about making commitments to 30 years for lenders, but you can't make a commitment of 2 weeks to each other.
Yeah.
And so we had that conversation. And so
Right.
lo and behold, I see her 4 or 5 months later. She says, yeah, I had to move out. I caught him cheating on me. I said, you moved out? She said, yeah, I moved out. I said, have you been making sure he's making the payments? I don't care. And I said, wait a second. You bought a house with somebody that you fell out of
Oh,
love with, and now you're expecting him to pay what would have been your portion
Right.
of the mortgage payment, and you act like, I don't care. You
Yeah.
think
what?
you'll care when there's a foreclosure and you can't buy another house for 5 or 6 years.
And that's
And
literally, I mean,
so and
so
so he was behind. He was behind,
right.
right? And she had to coerce him with a lawyer like Tom
Yep.
to
Yeah.
get him to participate
Mm-hmm.
and force the sale. I
Jeez.
said, did you learn a lesson? She said, yeah, I'll never buy anything with anybody. So there you
Yeah.
go.
Well,
There you
maybe if
go.
I
she's
mean,
married, but
even
Yeah.
then, like,
wow.
I mean, you put married on it and it does matter, but it's not,
Mhm.
you've got to be 100% committed the minute you purchase a house, in my opinion. I had a
Sure.
buyer a few weeks ago that, they're literally talking about how they're not ready to get married while they're looking at this house. And I'm like, okay, but you're ready to buy a house together. The thought is everything's going to be great. Everything's going to be easy. If we break up, we'll just sell the house. And then we introduce them to Tom when, when it doesn't work out that way.
Yeah.
One of the things that I like to talk about when Tom's on here is the difference between real estate and attorney, because they are, in this transaction, your realtor can help you with the real estate contracts as they're written. They can walk you through. We're filling in blanks. We're telling you our experiences. We're sharing with you our knowledge. We are not sharing with you our legal opinions. So
Correct.
realtors out there, we hear all the time how you're suggesting things that are outside the box. You're not allowed to do that. So when your realtor says to you, I'm sorry, you would need an attorney to explain that to you, they really do need an attorney to explain that.
Mhm.
It's not something that can be talked about if it's a legal proceeding with the realtor.
Yeah.
Yeah, if and I'll add to that. I didn't decades ago, as a young lawyer, I didn't understand the limitations that were placed on young agents who were not associate brokers or brokers. And
Absolutely.
that is that they had no authority to negotiate or change the black letter of the MAR contracts.
Nope.
Right.
And
Well, no, nobody does.
nobody does, and well, the broker does. And
Yeah, the broker.
my frustration with agents was that when I was hired as a lawyer, I would say, well, let's strike these two sentences. They don't apply,
Yeah.
right? We're not dealing with a farm. We're dealing with a row house. We don't need this stuff.
Right.
Or we're in the middle of Hartford County. We don't need the airport disclaimers, etc. And the
Yeah.
agent would say, can't do that.
Right.
And and several deals I had to say, we're going to walk away from the deal unless you give the papers to your broker who can do this.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in some of the early cases, the brokers were very annoyed to have been dragged in off
Yeah.
the golf course.
Right. Right.
I can see
Well,
that.
when we see realtors, when we see attorneys that are involved in the deal, it does paint a different picture. I mean, in
Yeah.
all honesty, everybody out there, we're being honest on here. So when you think attorney, you think, okay, I'll be honest, Tom, if you're a real estate attorney, but how many attorneys do we talk to that have no clue about real estate? And they're going to tell us these things. And we're just like, have you ever worked in real estate? You know what I mean? It's not the same. So
Yeah.
sometimes as realtors, it's kind of like being the nurse, right? Like if you compare it, your realtor's like the nurse, the one that's actually doing all the legwork, all filling in all the paperwork. But then when the time comes that person needs a doctor, that's when we have to step back and go, we're just the nurse in this situation, or we're just the realtor. Here's an attorney for you. Tom has been doing this for 40 years now?
Coming up on 40. And I've learned in running the real estate brokerage
Yeah.
that I actually enjoy the MAR form contracts, and our agents, as long as we educate them and work with them to identify when modification is absolutely necessary. We
Right.
don't negotiate commas and periods just because we can. It's got to
Exactly.
matter to the transaction. And for our agents to recognize when the lawyer on the law firm side of things ought to get involved is a very important skill for
Absolutely.
agents. Yeah, and
Absolutely.
it avoids a lot of frustration by buyers and sellers who think they're getting something from an agent who is young or is not well supervised, and they're nodding their head yes or no, and they really don't know.
Mm.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
that's a real risk. And then you know what? Our law firm can represent those agents before the commission when the complaints are filed.
Absolutely. When we talk about contracts, right? Those contracts change every October. Sometimes, one or two things will change. The next year,
Right.
something else will change. And we learn those contracts like the back of our hands. So a lot of times buyers are willing to just look at the contract and sign it. But Tom
Yep.
said something in the last podcast that we did with him that I want to revisit. And that was, there's no room, and I know I'm going to butcher this, but you said there's no room or there's no defense for a buyer saying, I didn't read it. There's,
Yep.
it's put in front of you and you're given this information. And if you're working with me or John or Deb, most likely you're going to be, that contract's going to be reviewed with you because we know you're not going to read it. So we will go through the contract while you're signing it and make sure that you understand exactly what you're signing. That's not always the case. So,
Yeah. And
again,
can I
there's no defense. You can't defend that.
Yeah, and listen, I want to add something. It's kind of gratuitous, but you touch on something. The MAR forms are written in English. And I
Absolutely.
was reading, and I read in the Banner a couple of weeks ago that the Hispanic population in Baltimore City has grown by 78% since 2010.
Wow.
I've seen that in my own practice. There are a lot of Spanish-speaking folks with a lot of money to spend in real estate in Baltimore and in Maryland.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it can be a defense if somebody is led to sign a contract by an English speaking agent who did not explain the contract to a Spanish speaker. And so
Wow.
there's another level of due diligence that I think is necessary. And one of the things that I hope to bring up um, uh, to the GBBR Education Committee, where I've been sitting for a couple of years, is the need to maybe push the association for multilingual contracts.
Or at least translators that are available. You know what I mean? I had a situation years ago where I was hired, and it was a Asian family, so I think from China, and they did not want to hire a Chinese agent, but their English wasn't very good. So for
Yeah.
whatever reason, they wanted to hire me. I didn't know how to speak to them, so we literally hired a translator to come to closing and sit and go over the closing documents. Now, we did not do that on the listing. There was enough understanding that we were comfortable with that. But when it came to closing, we just couldn't communicate well enough. So we did hire somebody that came in and translated the entire closing. So,
Yeah.
but that's
Yeah,
a good point. And to
Susan,
answer,
can I tell you a Chinese language anecdote?
oh, please.
Okay, so I got involved with a group of Chinese investors who were here through the EB-5 visa program. You invest a certain amount of money and you get fast tracked for your visa.
Wow.
And they purchased a portfolio of 150 properties in Baltimore.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Wow.
The documents were largely in English, and they were serviced by English-speaking attorneys who spoke no Chinese.
Right.
And the part of the deal that was left unspoken and unnegotiated was the amount of money necessary to redeem at least half of the 150 properties from tax sale.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
And the Chinese investors either didn't have the money or weren't willing to pay it. So all but 3 properties over 2 years were lost to tax sale,
Wow.
Wow.
which resulted in me attending ultimately a 3-week jury trial in Baltimore City. And we didn't have one Chinese interpreter. We had 3 different interpreters for 3 different dialects in
Yeah.
addition to English. And so imagine going to the bench and having a conference with the judge, and it was like the 3 Stooges, the 3 interpreters hovering over the judge,
Oh
speaking in different
no.
dialects, while all the parties at the trial table with their headphones trying to understand.
Wow.
And that
What a,
was
what a
that was
headache.
it was a dispute and a lawsuit that was born of one simple fact: the language barrier and the lack of translation services or the lack of documents in 2 languages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And understand that, I mean, I had a deal one time. He calls me, and Tom, you're going to get a kick out of this. Calls me and says, I'm ready to buy the second house. And I said, okay. He's like, we're putting it in my brother's name. My brother's buying it with me. I'm like, okay. He's like, so he's talking me through this whole process and is like, okay, we want you to send the offer over to my email. And I'm like, I have to talk to your brother. I mean, I've worked with you, but you're giving me your brother's information. You're giving me your brother's social security number. You're giving me your brother's everything. I need to at least have your brother acknowledge that he's aware that you're purchasing this house in his name, right? So he's like, well, are you calling me a liar? And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm certainly not. And I said, but I can't rate the offer unless I'm at least sending it to your brother's email and he's acknowledged that you have permission to do this for him. Well, he got
Yeah.
online. He got online and gave me a 1, changed his review, gave me a 1, the first 1 I've ever received in my life, and said that I didn't help him at all in the first transaction, and that I showed up for a check. That's like he found a way to make me look as poor as he could possibly make me look online. And it ended up backfiring. I guess the point of this story is that those testimonials, guys, it ended up backfiring. I ended up getting more clients because I had like 98, 9 or 9 and 10s, right? And then you get 1. And it actually helped me because people realize, hey, you can't please everybody. So I guess the gist of what I'm saying to you is you got to be kind all the time, and you've got to pay attention to the details. Can you imagine, Tom, me getting pulled in and having to sit in court and say, I never spoke to this man that I just wrote a contract for?
Yeah,
I mean,
we've had a half dozen of those things in the last 2 months.
right.
Where people overseas are saying, I want to do this real estate thing in Maryland, and just take my word that I
Absolutely.
am who I am, or that I'm the person whose
No.
name is on the deed, or I'm the person who's entitled to the tax sale surplus held by Baltimore City.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Exactly.
and I said, I don't do this by email. I need something more.
Right. I at least
And
need to
Jen,
be able to say a third party translator came in and verified that this man is giving permission to his brother to work together. The brother was not going to be on the contract. He was not purchasing the house. He was
Here's
just
bogus.
using his brother's information, his
yeah,
employment, and refusing to bring the brother onto the table. So I ended up
Mm.
not getting that deal, and I ended up with this big one on my, track record.
There's
And
the
there was
saying.
nothing I could
There's
do.
the saying.
Yeah,
There's the
I mean, there was
saying.
nothing I could do.
I've used it. It's called I call bullshit.
Right. I mean, like sometimes you just got to sit back and go, no, buyer seller, I'm
Yep.
not going to violate
It's
my
it's
license.
it's not logical.
It's not
right.
right.
It's like a boo 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 shit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
Yeah,
had a guy
exactly.
call me, wanted to sell a lot in Westminster, right?
yeah.
And I
That
look
wasn't
him
his
up
lot.
and I said, well, the only he goes, I live in
Right.
New York. I said, that's great. When are you going to be down again? He's like, I was hoping to do this over the phone. I said, that's not going to happen.
No way.
See, I will do, I mean, I won't do it over the phone, but I would do like a Zoom, or I would do some kind of something and go out and
Doesn't
meet with
prove
it.
who he
I would do
is.
that, but
That doesn't prove who he is.
just saying, you know what I mean? Like, I think, but
Doesn't prove
this
who he is.
was like, he's literally telling me, this is my brother's information, send everything to me. And I'm like, no, I'm not getting sucked into that straw. No.
Not
So
going to happen.
now, when we go back to setting pricing expectations, which was what this question started over, right, guys? When we talk about setting pricing expectations, one of the things that I do, and it goes back to the tricks of the trade, right? When you sit down with somebody, and I'll share this story with you because we talked about it last week or a couple weeks ago. When you set a sales price, right, you are looking at all the comparative sales in the neighborhood, and you're saying, look, this is where the appraiser is going to look. We talk about buyers. Right now, buyers will come in and offer you whatever price you put on your house. I mean, chances are they're going to do that. If you price too high, and you're just reasonably too high, 10, 15 grand over, you're probably going to get it. I mean, that's us being honest. It's one of those things. As a listing agent, we know that the seller is expecting more than the value of the property. We know that. So when you're sitting down with your seller and you say, look, I'm going to price this because you're telling me this is where you want it priced. Another thing, realtors, your seller sets the sales price, not you. So you can say, I'm not going to sell your house because you're overpricing it, but the seller gets to tell you what their house is going to be sold for. So they come up with that. What I do, my suggestion is that you have the conversation at that point that, hey, look, would you agree that 14 days from now, we're going to lower this price to where I think it should be? Right there, you've now opened up your first price drop because you've already said, I'm happy to be wrong. If you can get this and it appraises and we can go to closing, amen.
Okay.
But
So I'm devil's advocate.
yes,
Sue.
yes.
14 days rolled around. You're like, okay, ready for the price drop? I say, nope.
Yeah.
And then you've
Where
got
are
to
you?
be able,
Where are
I mean,
you?
they get to choose, right? It's their
Where
choice.
are you?
We as realtors don't get to tell them where to price their house. However, that's where you start going, all right, you're getting days on the market. You're making me look bad here. You know what I mean? Because they're affecting us as well.
But 14 days comes and goes, and the guy won't drop the price. Where do you go?
Yeah.
Well,
And
you
so
either
in
reduce this, you either let go of the client, or you just let it sit there and you stop
You could
doing
have done
open
that at
houses
day
every
one.
weekend and you
You
like
could
let
have
it
done that
sit.
at day one.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
And where the industry practices fall short, in my
yes.
estimation, is the failure of agents and brokers to document this process.
Oh, all
Because
right. You're right.
I represent agents and brokers before the commission on complaints that often arise from a failure to communicate, right? And the complaint from the consumer may be they didn't advise me about the HVAC not working properly or the right inspections, okay? But the core of the dispute is often this back and forth about pricing. What should I offer? What should I demand?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if the agents and brokers would write more emails that simply say, in detail, we spoke 30 minutes yesterday. I gave you 10 reasons why you're priced too high, but I work for you, so let's keep it high. But
Yeah.
you promised to revisit the subject in 5 days. And then the next email says, we revisited the subject and you're still a moron. And so the house
Right.
is not going to sell,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
And you're happy with everything else we're doing. That kind of email, it's written contemporaneous with events. It
Yep.
becomes
Mhm.
part of your business
Yeah, that's
record.
good, Thomas.
So they're easily admitted as an exhibit to a letter to the commission or an exhibit in a court case. Okay, because when the deal falls apart and you fire the client or they fired you, and the complaint comes rolling in 3 months after that, you're left to reconstruct your memory. What did we talk about? And let me look at my text. Oh, we talked a lot about our dogs and our kids' graduation.
Yep.
Who cares?
Yep. Yep.
So at listing appointment day, I'm not thinking about the real estate commission, but that was good. That was good recommendations, Tom. What I'm thinking about is this overpriced listing and how much energy I'm going to have to exert in this particular client
Hmm.
to maybe get a sale.
Yeah.
Wouldn't I be better spent to say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I completely understand. You keep telling me you don't want to give it away, but I'm telling you there's no comps to support your number. So rather than me take your money or steal your time,
Yep.
I'm going to leave now.
Mm-hmm.
And you're free to
Well,
do what you want. Because it
yeah,
never goes
and
good. I had one
yeah,
last year. It was the neediest listing I had in the last 5 years.
right.
And they had two pieces of property. And once we sold the first one, I said, I'm out. I
I'm not
said,
in a position to do
nothing,
that.
nothing. He
But
said this in an email. Nothing over the last 6 months that we recommended
right.
have you agreed to and followed the recommendation.
Yeah.
And you wonder why it took 6 months to sell your house?
Yep.
High price, not listening, not following the recommendation.
So I'm going to say this, and you guys tell me if you agree or not. If
Yeah,
you're
go ahead.
having an elevated conversation with your client, let that be the trigger, right? If you're getting elevated, that's when you need to either text or email, because the conversation, even if you had it on the phone, you can confirm the conversation through email. Hi, Betty. It was so nice speaking to you. I just want to confirm that after our conversation, we've decided to leave the house priced at blah, 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 even though I suggested lowering the price to blah, blah, blah. We will revisit this in 2 weeks. Now, Tom takes it to court and you're done. I mean,
Yep.
people don't realize realtors, Tom does hundreds of cases a year with real estate with realtors and buyers and sellers. Like Tom is on here to help all of us. And, hopefully when you need a real estate attorney, he's who you call, but he's doing this to educate you as well as we are. So keep
Yeah.
in mind.
Rule number one, Susan, right? Before they
Yeah.
think of me, the lawyer,
Yeah.
rule number one, ask your broker.
Ask your broker. Right. But I mean, we've all dealt with brokers, and I'm not talking about my broker because I love my broker. But over the years, 20 years in,
Yep.
I've seen some brokers that should not be brokers. And you have to have your go-to, whether it's a broker, an associate broker, whether it's a broker in a different office. Like HomeSmart has 6 offices locally. You've got to
Yeah.
have someone that can walk you through whatever situation you're in. As peers, like Deb doesn't work for HomeSmart. Deb works for Keller Williams. Tom doesn't work for HomeSmart. I mean, we have to come together and realize there are so many houses out here. We're not competing against each other. The chances,
Never.
and you know what? And I would speak, I have a buyer right now that I literally had this conversation with last night. It hurt my heart because I've been in this situation. He says, my friend's going to come look. We're at this house. He absolutely loves it. He's like, I'm going to have my realtor friend come look and tell me what he thinks we could do in the basement because one of his best friends is a realtor. Now, guys, we've all been there. And it's
What?
like, what do you mean your realtor friend? So
Yeah. What's
I
that?
sat down and I said, look, Dylan, I need to know. I shouldn't say names, but whatever. I just said his name. I said, I need to
Don't say
know
names.
that this guy is not showing you houses. You signed a buyer broker with me. You hired me. What's going on? Why would you ask your friend to show you a house or to come over and help you figure out how you can put a kitchenette in here? And he's like, oh, well, we talked about it a lot. He's not really in real estate anymore, even though he still has his license. And we wanted to hire you through your experience and we wanted to work with you. And I'm like, I understand, but you have to understand procuring costs like we talked about before. Agents, if a realtor is licensed, the deal is not between the friendship that they have. That realtor that shows them the house, that's doing it as a favor, can contact me and say, I want my commission. Like you
Yep.
cannot have another realtor show a house for you that doesn't get compensated. There's got to be a written agreement of something. So I had to tell my buyer, and it was a hard conversation. Either you have to choose me or your friend. And I mean it in the kindest way. I'm not going to get sucked into something that you would not be party to. It would be
Yeah.
between your friend and myself. And he was like, no, I completely understand. We just won't include him anymore. I didn't mean to upset you, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, as long as it's out there, I've learned not to hide behind like upsetting my clients. You got to be honest. You got to be forthright
Mm-hmm.
and, and pull them in so that
Yep.
everybody's on the same page. But,
Mm-hmm.
so
I
yeah,
just find I just find I just find to speak to Sue's issue about pricing,
yes,
and I agree with Sue. Some conversations are tough. They don't have to be yelling conversations. It's
right.
just tough communications. And if we're going to start high, right? It's a race to the bottom.
Exactly. Exactly.
Race to the bottom. And it won't be at the price you wanted them to list at. It'll be 20, 30, 40 grand less.
So if you guys remember the deal we talked about, John, 2 weeks ago, I put a house on the, well, I guess it's been 3 weeks now. Anyway, I put a house on the market. My seller wanted, I listed at 395, right? I wanted to list at 395. That was my suggested sales price. She wanted 405. So we went in at 405. We got a full price offer within 24 hours. And she was extremely happy over the 405 and the fact that she was right. So we had the hard conversation of don't get excited because it hasn't appraised yet.
Correct.
So now, whether you guys all agree with me or not, I like to price fairly because I don't want to push the appraiser. Now, what happened was the appraisal came in at 383. Why did it come in
Oh.
at 383? Because we pushed her too far.
Yep.
Had we went ahead and put it at 395, it had a new roof, had new carpet, freshly painted, new kitchen. Like they literally took their time and they put everything that they could into it. Now, it worked out because I gave my opinion in the beginning and I said 395. Would we have gotten the 395? My heart says yes. The appraiser
Yeah,
probably
you would
would
have.
have given it to us. But we
Yeah.
pushed her over the edge and she came back and said, nope, here you go, 383. Luckily, the seller agreed to come up a little bit and they paid 7,000 over the appraisal. So we ended at 390, but it was a $5,000 lesson from the gate. You got to price fairly, right? So
Yep.
whoever's
And couple
listening,
that, yeah, couple
breathe.
that,
So
Susan.
so here's the story I love. You get to the seller's house, you do your tour, you get your
Yeah.
paperwork done, and
Yeah.
the price issue comes up, and you get this is what I want for my house. And you're like, okay, I don't show anything anywhere near that is sold in a 10-mile radius,
Right.
right? Well, I want it because I put a roof on the house. I said houses come with roofs.
Right.
Well,
And all houses
I
have
put
to have
all
a
new.
decent roof.
Hold on.
I
Say that
painted the
again.
house
What?
and put in all new flooring. Houses come with flooring.
Oh, number two.
Exactly. Right. And that's
Oh,
going to make it so
you
good
put
for
in gold
pictures, right?
inlay?
That's
You put in gold inlay like at the Wynn Resorts in
Yeah.
Vegas? Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't see it.
Sorry. No real
Yeah.
value for you in that.
Yeah.
Houses have roofs.
Right.
Yeah.
We
So
had a cellar in a probate. Tom, you'll love this. His mother's house in Frederick, right? His big house. It was a 4-level split, biggest 4-level split I've ever seen. I think it was almost 4,000 square feet.
Yeah.
oh geez.
44. He decided, so she had cedar shake shingles roof, right, Tom?
Yeah.
We all know what those are. He
Yeah.
decided to put it was like rubber, but it looked like cedar shake shingles, but they were like some type of composite. So they were like, 50-year, 100-year shingles. It's on an estate sale.
Why?
He paid. Why? I was
Yeah.
like, what the hell are you talking about? A roof is a roof.
A roof is a roof.
He paid over $75,000
Oh,
for a roof.
Yeah.
I said, your dead mother may have more money than God, but that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right.
When we talk about, Susan, to your point about bidding high and ending up low,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We often caution both our law firm clients and our brokerage clients that the signed contract is really the beginning of negotiations.
100%.
That gross number is simply that, a gross number. And between the appraisal, the property inspection report, seller contributions and concessions, and maybe an intervening casualty or two,
Right.
that may not be the net number.
Absolutely.
And you've got to keep an eye on the calendar and tick off all the contingencies as they occur. As each contingency expires, you fence in the real price.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah, I think
It is
so
just
when
a
someone
starting
wants
price.
to overpay, or when someone wants to ask too much, we can say you can start there, but the lender's not going to let the deal close, or that roof that only has 3 useful years left is not going
yeah.
to allow that price to stand either.
Yeah, and I think that people need to understand that the value of their home,
as
that
is.
realtor that's sitting down with you, presentation, we talk about presentation all the time. Every podcast, we talk about presentation, how you show yourself to the world, whether whether it's your house or whether it's your appearance or whether it's your clothes, all of that comes into play. And everybody needs to understand that the first look is the first presentation, right? Like it's telling a story about you. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I think that today was a great episode. We're going to do it. Everybody is welcome. If you're a realtor, if you're a buyer, seller, and you want to join us, please just reach out. Deb, Tom, you are welcome every week if you'd like. We usually record on Thursdays. So Thursday around noon, that can change. Everybody's schedules are very flexible. So we appreciate you. Thank you for listening in. Deb, thanks again. And everybody have a great week.
Sure. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Take care.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye. Good to see you
You too, Deb.
guys.
Thanks.
All right.
Take care. Thank you, Tom.
Bye.
Bye,
I'll
Deb.
call you,
I'm
Tom.
going to text
I'll
you,
call
Deb.
you.